Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. In June 2018, the Comic Culture crew attended HerosCon in Charlotte. As always, HerosCon was well organized with great guests, vendors, panels, and cosplayers. I spoke with a number of artists and writers and am sharing the highlights with you. Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone at Heroes Aren't Hard to Find, the con's organizers, for allowing us access to this year's show, and the Comic Culture production team, Anastasia Sitnikova, Jamie Liddy, and Michael Liddy for their work behind the scenes. Artist Lee Weeks is known for his incredible storytelling, expressive figures, and attention to detail. If you've read the Eisner Award-winning Batman Elmer Fudd crossover, then you know that Lee is a true master of comic art. You have a great sense of where light is, where shadows are, what to show, what not to show. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts on how you kind of compose the shots and how you light them.
For the most part, I usually choose a fairly simple lighting to just define form. It was drilled into me at a very young age to pick a single light source, although I've kind of strayed from that a little bit. As of late, I experiment with a lot of additional light sources in the last couple of jobs, just because as you look around, you'll see reflective lights and such that you don't always know where they come from. I don't feel as limited to the single light source thing or even a dual light source as I once was. But for me, it's all about information. Initially, the first priority is telling the story and form and space. So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Well, it's interesting because when I look at your artwork, there's a very strong style to it. It seems casual, and yet there's a lot of thought that obviously is going into it. And I'm sure I'm just kind of rambling while I try and phrase this the right way, but you seem to have a great understanding of body language, of acting, and you make it seem so casual. And I'm wondering how much you're thinking about that as you start laying out the page and as you start penciling and as you get into the inks.
A tremendous amount. Honestly, there are times I will spend a long time doing something over because I can't get to that place where I see the natural. I love finding that, you have a pose and then at the last minute there's one extra little tilt to the chin. I mean, it'll be just the tiniest thing, but I know that speaks to me somehow, those little natural turns and an extra shift, or the way that flesh in the flank area will kind of wrinkle a little bit when you stand on one hip. Those things, I find the joy of drawing in discovering and uncovering those things. So, but there are times when that naturalness that looks, which is a casual, I smile because sometimes it can be a real wrestling match and nearly throwing something across the studio to get to that place where, okay, it looks casual and natural, but it's not. And other times it really is, but at other times it just happens. But there's a pressing in that needs to take place where you kind of, I was speaking with an instructor from a school earlier, just from SCAD, and we were talking about, and I was just saying how it's just not always there. There has to be a pressing in where you kind of get to the place where you're seeing it. It's almost like a matrix kind of thing, where you just start to see it instead of, it's not so much the struggling or thinking about rules or thinking about construction, which all those things are in that. I love the rules. I love learning the rules, the proportions, anatomy, construction, light, shape, all that stuff. But at a certain point, everything has to become so internalized that you don't want to do it by the rules. It has to be so internalized or written on the tablet of your heart, so to speak, that I want it to happen in a, just from a gut place, and use the rules as a corrective tool. If I'm missing the mark, I can go back and use that as a thing to kind of bring me back into. But so in warming up and drawing and just scribbling and stuff, there's something that happens after a time. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it takes a while, some days it just might not happen. But it's just a kind of a pressing, you just start to see things better, and a lot of those natural turns and stuff can only happen, and I can't plan them. They kind of happen. You have to see it show up on the page, and then just kind of dive on it, when it shows up.
And is it something where you're looking at it like if I start to sketch, I find if I work too much on something, it loses the spontaneity. Is it something where you kind of can see that you have it and you can just keep tweaking it, or is it something where if it's just not going to work, you're going to just try a different approach?
Both. I mean, there are times when I've just had something right there where I've wanted it, or so close, but there was one little thing that I got too greedy, and then I just snuffed the life out of the drawing, like you say, if you overwork it. Yeah. I also, in that overworking thing, there are stages to this: the layout stage, the thumbnail stage, the layout stage, the transfer to the board stage. Sometimes I could stand to lose one of those stages to preserve a little bit more of the spontaneity and the life of the drawing. So.
I guess my last question will be, you're at HerosCon, you're working on sketches for fans, and I'm just wondering, a lot of people come up, they want their books signed. A lot of people like me come up and want to ask you questions for various publications and TV shows. So how do you find the time to do the sketches, to greet the fans, talk to the fans, and still, I don't know, maybe sleep, eat, go to the bathroom?
I haven't figured that out yet. I really haven't. Time, I mean, I have a looming deadline that I have no idea how it's going to get done when I get back home, but somehow it will get done. But the time management thing is a never-ending struggle to figure out for me.
If you're like me, you were introduced to comics in the pages of your daily newspaper. Few comic strips are as well known as Dennis the Menace. I had the opportunity to speak with Marcus Hamilton, the strip's current artist. His story is quite inspirational. Marcus, how long have you been on Dennis the Menace, and what do you do?
Well, next week it will be 25 years since I called Hank Ketchum out in California after I saw him on television. He was being interviewed about the new Dennis movie coming out. That was in 1993. And they asked him what he wanted to do now that he had drawn Dennis for over 40 years at that point. And his comment was, I want to find somebody to draw Dennis so I can travel and paint, but I have this daily deadline pulling on me every day. And right when he said that, because I was out of work, I had been an illustrator for 20 years doing covers for magazines, Harlequin Romance, Saturday Evening Post, things like that, which had been my goal from when I was a little kid. I loved illustration, and I thought if I could do magazine art, that's what I'd like to do. And so I'd been doing that for 21 years until computer graphics put me out of business because the art directors no longer wanted the hand-painted artwork. They liked that slick graphic look that I couldn't do at that time. But anyway, so I ended up working at Walmart, making minimum wage, and I just turned 50 years old, and that's when I was watching TV that day when Hank Ketchum said he'd like to find someone to draw Dennis. And I thought, that sounds like an opportunity. So I called an artist friend of mine, Jim Scancarelli, who lives here in Charlotte. He draws Gasoline Alley comic strip and has been for over 30 years. He and I worked together in our first job. When I came to Charlotte in 1965, Jim was my supervisor in the art department at WBTV, Channel 3. So we got to become close friends. Then he started freelancing when he left, and I went into freelancing doing magazine art. And so I called Jim that day I heard Hank Ketchum say that, and I said, do you happen to have Hank Ketchum's phone number? He said, as a matter of fact, I do. So I called Hank Ketchum out in Monterey, and I said, Mr. Ketchum, I just saw you on TV and you said you'd like to retire someday. If you're serious about that, I would love to have the opportunity to draw Dennis. And he said, well, send me some samples of your work and let me see what you've done. So I put together a package of Saturday Evening Post cover, a Bob Hope I had painted, and Harlequin Romance covers, things like that, nothing like Dennis the Menace, and I mailed it out there. And he sent back to me, he said, Marcus, I like your work. It was a four-page letter. I couldn't believe it when I got it back. And he said, if you're serious about pursuing Dennis, show me how you would draw him in 4 different situations, and he gave me the caption to go by. Well, I was ecstatic because I couldn't believe Hank Ketchum, one of the most respected cartoonists in the business, was willing to take a chance on a total stranger he had never met, 3,000 miles away, but if he was willing, I was too. So I did the 4 drawings, sent them back out there, anxiously awaited his reply. A couple weeks later, I got a big white envelope. I opened it up, and he had sent back all of my drawings with a sheet of tracing paper over it. He had crossed out everything I had done and redrew it, and out to the side wrote comments on how I could improve my drawing style to look more like his. Well, it wasn't discouraging in any way. It was encouraging because here was an opportunity to get back into artwork, cartooning instead of illustration, that I'd kind of given up on when my career as an illustrator ended. I thought, I'm 50 years old, I guess that was it for me, but here was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. So Mr. Ketchum agreed to train me to take over the daily panels when he would announce his retirement. There's another cartoonist that has been doing the Sunday Dennis since 1982. His name is Ron Ferdinand, and he lives in upstate New York, but he was working with Mr. Ketchum out in the Monterey studio when Mr. Ketchum hired me, and he flew me and my wife out to meet him after we had talked on the phone and faxed each other back and forth. And I got to work with Mr. Ketchum in his studio, and he showed me exactly the process and everything, and he really had some good advice for me. He said, I want you to understand that the daily Dennis panel and the Sunday Dennis comic strip are 2 different animals. The Sunday page has about 8 or 9 little panels, talk balloons, and color to tell the story. You have 1 single panel to tell an entire story with the gag or the caption that's at the bottom. So have fun doing it, and if you're having fun doing it, your readers will pick up on that. If it stops being fun, your readers will pick up on that and they'll stop reading. He was really smart. He was a creative genius, really. But he announced his retirement in 1994, and I started taking over the daily Dennis panels, and he would critique my work. I would fax him my sketches. He would fax back and tell me what I did wrong or how to improve it. He was a great creative teacher, the way he taught me to take over and do the line illustrations. And it has been a joy, a challenge, because I have a weekly deadline. I have to have 6 panels finished regardless, because you've got to stay on a schedule. We're 6 to 8 weeks ahead. So the drawings I do right now here in June will be in the newspaper in August. But it's just an opportunity that I never thought would come along. I'm glad I didn't give up when my first career ended and I was working at Walmart. If I had given up, I would not have seen what Mr. Ketchum said in that interview as an opportunity. But when he said, I want to find somebody to draw Dennis, it just, in my head, I just felt like this is an opportunity. And I'm thankful that I took advantage of it.
One of the things about Dennis's art style is that the ink line is so bold and so, I'm not sure if it's a brush or if it's a pen, but can you tell me a little bit about your ink process?
Well, it's exactly what Mr. Ketchum did. His drawing style was very unique. He uses a croquis pen that you dip in a bottle of ink. It's not the felt tip markers that a lot of cartoonists use now. And the type of illustration board is Bristol board. It's thin enough that once I do my pencil sketches of the daily panel, we have writers that send us their ideas for the jokes, and every week I will pick out 6 of the jokes, or gags as they call them, and as I read it, I think, okay, now how would Dennis or his family or Margaret or Mr. Wilson be reacting to what that says? And in my mind, I come up with an image and I sketch it out in pencil. on tracing paper. And it may take 6 or 7 drawings before I get it to the point where it looks like I think it will tell the story. Then I put it on my light table, meaning there's a light shining through the glass, and I can put a sheet of Bristol board over that, and I can see enough of my pencil sketch that I then take the pen, dip it in the bottle of ink. I have one pen point that's larger to draw the border. I have another pen point to do the fine line, but the pen point gives enough so that it will get thick or thin depending on the amount of pressure you put on. So I do all the drawing with that and then take a brush and fill in the large black areas with the ink.
See, whenever I look at the line, I always thought that it was a brush, but I didn't realize that you could just manipulate the nib that way.
Yeah, that's how Mr. Ketchum established his style. And when I came in to take over, he said, I want you to draw with the same pen points that I do. It's kind of hard to find those Gillot 170 pen points. Not many people sell them at art supply stores anymore. You have to order them. But he gave me a lot of them that lasted me quite a few years. So, but it was an awakening to me because I'd never used a pen like that to do inking. I had a rapidograph, which was like a ballpoint pen in a way with different size points. When I was illustrating, if it was in black and white, that's the kind of pen I would use, not the kind I'm using now.
HerosCon's focus on comics attracts top artists from around the world. Brazilian artist Joe Prado, currently working on Superman at DC Comics, spoke to me about his work as an inker. Joe, what is it that you do as an inker?
Well, the inker's job is to not complete the penciler's job, but enhance it, okay, and bring out the best on the penciler's art, you know, and make it really recognizable for the fans, and make it not better, I don't know, but, you know, it's completed, you know, that's it.
And are you using the traditional tools, pen, ink, brush, or are you using the digital tools?
No, I use basically rapidograph pens, basically that, okay. People hate me because of that, okay. But I love those pens because I have a technical drawing background, so I'm comfortable in using that. But I use a little brush, you know, here and there to do textures, you know, more organic stuff. And digital is only for, you know, like when I prep the scan to send to the publisher, to DC in case, you know. That's it, you know. And very much old school. Okay.
Old school is the best, frankly.
Oh yeah, it is.
And you've got a relationship with a couple of different pencilers, and I'm wondering how that collaboration works.
Well, yeah. Well, I work basically with Ivan Reis as his inker for the past almost 10 years. Okay, since Blackest Night. And besides him, we work till now. You know, right now we're doing Brian Michael Banda's Superman for DC. And well, we collaborated in a bunch of stuff throughout the years, and I also had a chance to work with some of my heroes growing up as a comics fan, such as Jose Garcia Lopez, you know, and Dan Jurgens, you know, guys that I was just like, what, you know, and they asked me to ink them, and I said, that's so surreal, you know, for me. You know? But it's really cool because you exercise different muscles, you know, working with different artists, you know. Also Paul Pelletier and also Robson Roca, you know, like I didn't work with a big variety of artists, you know, but the ones that I get, I'm really grateful for, you know. We're friends, and that's the most fun part, you know.
Dawn Griffin is a self-published cartoonist and podcaster. We spoke about her current project and how she builds her audience. I'm going to mess up the name. Zorf, Bert and Fred.
You nailed it.
Okay, so what is this book about?
So the whole series is about 2 aliens that come to Earth disguised as dogs. And they're here to study humanity, but really they just make fun of us.
And so what inspires this kind of book? Because it's a fun concept. Everyone loves sci-fi, everyone loves dogs, and putting the two together just seems like something that's going to be a hit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just inspired by the fact that I think myself and I think a lot of people feel as though they're aliens on their own planet sometimes. And humanity is very complex, and we're all very kind of weird in our own way, though desperately trying to be normal. But there is no normal, so I think I just wanted to play that up with a true third person, quote-unquote person, point of view by showing humanity through the eyes of aliens. And then you make it cute with dogs. So you can't go wrong with that.
And so when you're working on the book, you're the writer and the artist. What type of tools are you using? Are you using the traditional pen and ink, or are you using the more modern digital tools?
Well, when I started this 8-9 years ago, I was using more traditional tools, but I have adapted to technology, and so now I draw on a Surface Pro. And right on the screen, it's very seamless for me. It doesn't work for all artists, but for me, I feel like it portrays my style pretty well. So yeah, it's very easy now. It's a lot. You don't have to scan and piece things back together. That's nice.
So when you're working on these books, what's the end goal? I mean, obviously, it's to get them into people's hands. So how do you do that?
With this series, I kind of just decided to skip over all the traditional path. Originally, I wanted to get into newspapers and be syndicated, cartoonist, and all of that. But with newspapers kind of slowly working out, unfortunately, but with that kind of going away, with it being harder and harder to make a living off of doing that, I decided to skip over the syndicate, skip over the publisher, so I actually self-publish these books. And I have worked with other publishers on other things, but this was kind of my first big step in like, okay, I have this great idea, I'm going to run with it, and I'll take it right to the customer. I'll go to Comic-Cons, and I sell it to kids, I sell it to adults, and you have that one-on-one interaction, and it's great. And a lot of people really like to support independent artists, and to kind of feel like they found something like a needle in a haystack kind of thing. So
if someone watching this wants to get a copy of your book, how could they find you?
You can go right to my website, zfcomics.com, ZF and comics, and you can order right from there, and they come directly from me. So if you order, I will sign just like I would here. I sign the inside. I do a little sketch of the character inside. I personalize it for you. It feels like a direct transaction straight from the artist to the reader. And often, especially with kids that love to draw too, I'll get emails where they're drawing my characters, doing little things, and it just makes my day. And it's really cool with the internet, with self-publishing, that you can skip over the middleman and just have that direct interaction with your audience.
Matt D. Wilson has been writing humor for more than a decade, including King Oblivion and his latest series, Everything Will Be Okay. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in comics?
Sure. So I've been into comics pretty much my whole life. I've also been very into comedy and humor writing. So I started in like online humor writing and doing that kind of thing. But I was working for Crack.com for a long time, and the very short-lived Crack magazine revival, which I think only went 4 issues. But from that, I started my own comedy website, and I just happened to be working at a newspaper at that time, and I didn't want to write things under my own name because I was worried that my bosses would see what I was writing and think that wasn't lacked journalistic integrity because it was these like kind of goofy humor pieces. So I started writing under the name King Oblivion PhD, and I started a website called the International Society of Supervillains. In the course of that, I developed the voice for this character who is sort of like a Dr. Doom type of guy, like this greatest supervillain in the world. And I wrote the first book, the Supervillain Handbook, just for fun. I just kind of started writing as this guy and kind of couldn't stop. And I self-published that. That ended up being published as the Supervillain Handbook. Then that became the Supervillain Field Manual, which followed that. And then Supreme Villainy came out last year, which is King Oblivion's autobiography, his life story. And in the meantime, I've been writing comics the whole time because that's something I've also kind of been doing on the side since I was in my late teens. It's just been a matter of finding artists to work with because I have no artistic talent of any kind. The words I'm good with, the lines on the page I'm not so good with. And it's actually been through podcasting that I've been able to find artists to work with on some of the projects that I've been doing. So Everything Will Be Okay was funded through a Kickstarter last year. It's a 5-issue miniseries, and the 5th issue is being completed now. And so, yeah, it just keeping a lot of irons in the fire and doing things that are exclusively words and working with artists on things that are words and pictures and trying to do it all.
It's funny too because Dr. Doom is one of those characters that is ripe for that kind of examination because he's always painted as very grandiose, and yet in the end he's always going to lose.
Yeah.
So what is it about that sort of character that you can find the humor in?
I think there's something internally funny about a character who always loses, almost no matter what. They always lose. Even when it seems that they might win, they ultimately lose. And yet they have unwavering confidence. I've always enjoyed the kind of character type of the scoundrel, and I love the weaselly, cowardly scoundrel, but I also love the scoundrel who has no self-awareness. They can do no self-examination, and so when I write his King Oblivion PhD, he's the most unreliable narrator. He's constantly talking about contradictory things, as though, I've never lost anything ever, and here's where my layer fell apart in 1937. It's saying two things at once, straight-facedly, and with utter belief that anyone will believe it. So it's very fun to write as that character, when I could not be more opposite of that.
I hope you've enjoyed this special episode of Comic Culture. If you're interested in attending HeroesCon 2019, mark the weekend of June 14th on your calendar. There's plenty of time for you to make that awesome costume for the cosplay contest. Thanks so much for watching Comic Culture. We'll see you again soon.